Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the updated version of the Damn Slap podcast, post-COVID. Today, I'm joined by a friend of the podcast, one that I think has many opinions that we can learn from. How are you today?
Good, thank you.
Nice. So, Alon, I usually do this with guests. I usually tend to ask them, how would you personally define yourself in a few words?
Ooh, that's a big question.
It is.
Let's say freedom addicted, creative, and having a desire to find peace and quiet, while at the same time adventure and excitement. So
Well, that kind of sounds like a lot of good attributes a person
That sums
should
it up.
want to have.
yeah,
I mean, but, these are troubled times. So
yeah.
I get to ask a question I've never asked a guest before. What do you think about this barrier between you and I?
I think it's dehumanizing.
I mean, you made a comment
Sure,
earlier
but-
that I thought was hilarious, that it does feel like a prison.
A prison visit.
Yeah. Like it is pretty dehumanizing.
Yeah.
But what do you think about this whole situation? I mean, it is really up to every individual to generate their own opinion on this matter. It is one that affects us all. But what is your personal take on the matter?
Well, lots of people will want to crucify me for this. And
I
that's
mean,
fine.
everyone is entitled to their own opinion. This is, I
But
believe
yeah,
in
I
that
think
100%.
that we're being scared into mass germophobia and being scared into giving up human rights and liberties that are fundamental to having a civilized, free society. And most people at least, as far as I know, are too quick to trust the government with their well-being.
I mean, yeah, that is
That's what
true.
I
I
think.
mean, I
Short version.
That's a really
Yeah.
well summarized version of your opinion. I will say, my background, I come from Italy. So Italy is one of those countries where we rely heavily on the opinion of the government, as in what they say is law,
Yeah.
ironically enough. But here is a very different approach. Do you support the Dutch approach towards COVID?
Like the way the governments went
Yeah.
about it? No, because I think if I was to support any country's approach, it would be Sweden, because they just treated this the way that, yeah, you should treat this, which is just the flu season of another variety. And, as we can see that their economy is not destroyed, but also their public health is fine. So the gloom and doom that they predicted would happen if we didn't shut down, it didn't happen there. Well, they never shut down, so I think it's a good example of reality
That is
versus
one
the
thing.
mass delusion that we are forced into.
It is, yeah, it does kind of make me question a lot of things, but one of the things that I have been questioning recently, it's like, what are facts? Because we get thrown all these informations and statistics, it's like, it's overwhelming almost, because
Yeah.
one day I get told, oh, okay, this many people are going to die and we're all doomed. The next day it's like, oh, it looks better. And then it's like, oh, no, but it's going to get worse. And it's this roller coaster of information. And I'm not a biologist. I'm not a biochemist. I don't understand how this stuff functions. And
Yeah.
as a student, it's like, damn, I'm not living this student life. Like, going to a bar is a far concept now, but last year it was fine.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't know. But I guess students are really impacted by COVID. But how are you personally impacted by COVID? Like, do you have any instances where you were like, damn?
Yeah, it's really up in your face in everyday life, like in very mundane things, like grocery shopping. Like that used to be a sort of a social experience,
Yeah.
and now it's it's also people are separated and like everyone has to take a shopping cart, and there's like a special route with stickers on the floor, so it's
I mean, it
you
does
get
feel
confronted with it everywhere.
exactly,
There's
but
no
it feels
escaping
kind of
it.
dehumanizing, as you said.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, this barrier between us kind of signifies that heavily. But let's get to the meat of the actual podcast. So, from what I understand, you've had several psychedelic encounters or experiences. right?
Yeah.
And I guess the question that everybody would always ask is like, yo, how was it? How was it? What did you do? How crazy was it? That's not exactly how I want to go about it. I just want you to explain to me how your journey, essentially.
Yeah.
It's a big journey. I know.
Yeah,
I'm
it's a
asking a
long
lot,
journey.
but I think it's really interesting, and I think a lot of people find themselves in scenarios like this.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what. How would you summarize your journey from point A to point B?
Initially, I just tried magic mushrooms in an kind of recreational kind of drive. It was really curiosity. I didn't know what to expect. I just knew it was apparently an interesting experience. So, being curious, I wanted to try it. So, with two friends, I decided to try it, and then I did not understand what was happening because, apparently. A lot more awareness came to me than I anticipated, and rather than an entertaining experience, which at times it was most of all a very educative experience, and it was a lesson in self-awareness and becoming aware of deeper layers of your own psyche, of my own psyche in this case, that were previously unknown, and then from there it became immediately apparent to me. Essentially, my first trip was a massive bad trip.
Oh yeah,
because I didn't.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I didn't
I'm sorry
know
to
what was
hear
going to
that.
happen. So I was in an environment with people who were way too active, and it was kind of a party environment outside. And even though fear, got the better of me for most of the experience, I did see that there was tremendous power in it. So from there, I did try it again and continue to explore psychedelics, but my first experience was with mushrooms. But yeah, it's a long journey from there, so you're gonna have to be
no, yeah,
more
no, for sure.
specific, or
But
I'm gonna
I'm
sit here
more-
for 3 hours
I mean, yeah, that's,
talking
that's
about
true. I have time, don't
all
you
these
worry.
experiences.
No, but
Yeah.
the thing that is really interesting is that a lot of people's first time with, especially things such as psychedelics, it's really up to the situation, and it really determines their opinion on
Yeah.
things heavily. Like I've had encounters with people who, for example, tried it at a party, just like you, and
Yeah.
then they happen to have whatever a misunderstanding with someone or something happened that threw them off, and from that point on, they're completely against psychedelics.
Yeah, that's a pity. I know
And
a
it's
few
like-
cases like that too.
Exactly. I
Yeah.
swear, a lot of people have had this encounter, and it's like, I guess it makes the argument that maybe psychedelics are not for everybody. What do you think about that?
Might be true, because you have to have a certain stability of mind, and also to be very well at defining boundaries between imagination and reality. Because if you're like really sensitive to psychosis, it might not be a great idea. But other than that, I think most people are good to go and might have very interesting, educative, and healing experiences. But you do need to create the right setting and create the right environment and company, because that experience will not automatically just come if you take a psychedelic. You have to facilitate it to be in the right environment. And what I found to help, and apparently many other people, is either outdoors in nature, where there's lots of quiet, but like a natural environment, like a forest or a lake, or an indoor environment that's kind of shaped and stylized like a sort of temple.
That's really neat, actually.
Yeah, so that's how I do it. And then when I do it, whether it's mushrooms or LSD or DMT, I tend to just focus inside, and then interesting experiences do come up. But yeah, there's so much to talk about.
Yeah,
You
for
have
sure.
to
But I
hit a
mean, about
specific topic.
your first trip, for example, it was a lot to take in. You
Yeah.
told me just now, it was a lot to take in. But were you mentally ready for it
No.
at all? Like you felt like it was overwhelming
Well,
you.
It's weird. Like yes and no. I was not ready in the sense that I did not expect such a powerful experience to come, and I did not expect to be shaken at such a deep level,
Yeah.
and have all my beliefs about reality questioned, but at the same time, something in me was apparently looking for that experience and was very happy to have found it. And from there, I continued to do it. Initially with mushrooms, and then later also with, as soon as I could get my hands on it, with LSD, and then eventually with DMT. But I found out that it's a way to explore yourself and to really get to know yourself.
I mean, it is
Yeah.
extremely powerful. I do believe that. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
you just mentioned, for example, LSD, lysergic acid diethylamide. Usually, I think it's commonly known as the fourth strongest psychedelic in the world, something
I
like that. I
didn't know
think,
that, but
yeah, I think
in terms of
we can fact
potency,
check this, but like,
yeah.
yeah, but it is. I've had several encounters with people who claim that it is a lot more powerful than people ever believe or they could ever conceive. So you have
Yeah.
some people that take it thinking, "Oh, I'm gonna see colors and elephants, and I'm gonna look like the Beatles," you know,
Yeah.
and then you do it, and your whole reality just shatters. And you, as a person, your ego death. I suppose a lot of people
Yeah.
have had that before. It's your ego just kind of perishes, and you're just there, and you realize that reality doesn't matter. You know, in that instant, that everything around you is mutually connected.
Yeah.
And that is one feeling that I've heard is undeniably different than every other feeling that
Yeah.
a person can experience, which I will give, you know, I guess my friends have had experiences with this. That's why I can confirm this for personal experience that people are just overwhelmed by the sort of reality that they're thrown into. But
Yeah.
me knowing this doesn't give me any information about what a DMT trip could be like.
Yeah.
Because DMT, to those that do not know at home, DMT I think is the strongest psychedelic
As far as
currently.
I can tell, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. As
My
far as I have,
experience, for sure.
as far as Vice tells me, this is the case. But you've actually experienced it firsthand.
Yeah.
I mean,
Numerous times. So
Yeah,
I did
numerous times, but how?
explore the-
how did you come around to actually getting your hand, you know, like the actual conceptualization of this
Mhm.
and the going through with it, and then being like, yeah, this is exactly this is it, you know?
Yeah, well, first I read about it and I heard, I think like many people heard Terence McKenna speak of it and spoke of it very interestingly and
Mhm.
highly. And of course that piqued my interest and I started asking around, and at the time there was almost like no one in the whole country that could arrange it, and there was apparently one guy somewhere in the north
One guy.
who would be able to get some, but way overpriced. So I was like, meh, it's not meant to be. And then at some point I met a guy who was like me, interested in psychedelics, but he was also studying biochemistry.
Biochemistry.
Obviously, I'm not going to mention his name.
No, I mean
But-
for the
This guy
let's
helped
call him
me
Bob for the
get the
time
goals.
being.
Yeah. And this is where I had my first experience. And from there, I started experimenting, of course, trying, sharing it with other people and cross-referencing our experience. And this is like where other psychedelics like mushrooms or LSD would still leave you anchored in this world, although with your head in another, slightly submerged in another world. DMT would actually tear, if you smoked enough of it, it would tear you from this world and just plunge you face first into an entirely different world that is completely incomprehensible from this earthly perspective. And then once I was there, first I noticed that my mind, my ego, was trying to name everything and trying to define everything. And it was just going wild because
You could.
everything changes so fast and it seems to take a shape, and then before you can name it, it's already
Gone.
taking another shape. So it's like an organic mass of
Just
who knows
nothing.
what.
Yeah, it's
And your mind is
amazing.
trying to like conceptualize it and trying to name everything, and it just can't. And then at some point it'll just stop trying. And then at this point, I think I learned a lot from like Buddhism and Hinduism, like the meditation techniques, which were interesting to try, but never really made any sense to me in a sober mind state. Suddenly they made sense. They had a real purpose in the DMT space, where I was just struggling to just define everything, and I learned to not define everything and
You
just
don't need
observe.
to.
And that's where I thought that this Zen,
Mhm.
merely observing state of being, that's often practiced in Buddhism, that's where it made sense. And then, I was able to travel deeper and deeper.
Deeper and deeper
And
until you found your
understand
real
some
self.
things that, those things are not communicable in words, but they're
Exactly. I
on a
mean,
deep level.
but I will say I've read several times this. I mean, it seems a little bit too coincidental. That's why a lot of people are always putting focus on this. They
Yeah.
say that a lot of people that consume DMT end up having a very similar psychedelic experience, where they interact with a body that is almost third dimensional. You know, it's like
Yeah.
a being that does not make sense to you, but you feel like you belong with them.
Yeah.
That's
yeah.
like, you know, the general guidelines. I think that's like
Mhm.
the general pattern. And I wanted to ask you, have you had an experience like that? Did you feel connected to the being you had in front of you?
Yeah, numerous, but they would take various shapes,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes they would take very Earth-like shapes, like human shapes or reptilian, snake-like, or gecko or lizard.
Was it ever people you knew? Like people that exist?
No, they were not like regular. They just had the vague outlines, the vague
Oh,
shape of the human, but
okay.
then they were made out of either transparent light or they were made out of a mass of worms or snakes that were bound. and,
Oh.
like, mashed together and all together formed a human shape.
But I am going to ask, is it frightening in the moment or are you at peace?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, so it is scary.
It is-
So
it
you're
is
like,
frightening.
oh, I'm seeing this,
Because
you know?
you're like, and sometimes they are Earth-like and friendly beings, but sometimes they are like utterly alien and
Ooh.
sometimes even disgusting and terrifying in ways that you can't even describe. And the only thing that comes close is like octopus-like. In that
because
way,
it's-
creepy and alien.
Oh.
And sometimes it gets really intense and really otherworldly and creepy. But I learned also to whether the beings were pleasant and attractive or whether they were repulsive and terrifying. I learned to always stay still, to
Oh.
never allow myself to be pulled into the attractions or to be repulsed away, which was something that I got out of the story of the Buddha trying
Mhm.
to reach the
That's a really...
enlightenment under the tree, because this pre-knowledge that I basically preloaded myself with really helped me get through some difficult moments, because they're gonna come.
And that's the harsh reality about
Some
life.
of them were really terrifying creatures, and I learned to always stay still and not to be moved. And I think that was very valuable and worked through the rest of my life to make me more shock-proof.
I mean, I can believe that these encounters, I mean, they can definitely impact a human being to a point where you really are so shook that
Yeah.
nothing really makes sense to you anymore, and you realize that nothing does make sense. We give it meaning. And I think that is really profound. And I believe that having a very conservative mentality to this, in the sense that, like, okay, you do this, it's wrong. Paracetamol is a drug, it's fine. Coffee is fine. Alcohol
Yeah.
is fine. And then psychedelics are definitely not. That's a very conservative opinion, I think. And that's the thing. It's like having that mentality kind of limits the possibilities that a human can go to. If you think
yeah.
about it, I believe that alcohol is an extremely dangerous substance that we consume almost on a daily basis on the premise of social norms, right? Like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, but I'm,
Yeah.
you know, just a
Everyone
glass of
does
wine.
it.
But then you end up getting drunk at 3 a.m. and you end up breaking the mirror of a car, and you're like, wait,
Yeah.
but that's not me, right? That's not the person I am.
No, that's destructive behavior.
Exactly, and it is kind of strange. I mean, I think as a species, we need to redefine what is important and what is not. Whether culture or tradition is involved, I think we should most certainly reconsider our standards of living. However, one of the standards of living that I believe we need to define and redefine is our perception of what is acceptable.
Yeah.
You have dreads. I think everyone who's watching the podcast right now
He
knows,
probably
but for
knows.
audio listeners,
Yeah.
he has dreads. And I would definitely check out the video because the arranged, like they're perfectly arranged. I wake up, I look like shit, and I have short hair. How do you do it?
It's like I didn't want to be vain and be in front of the mirror with gel.
You were
So
like,
I take dreads because it's low maintenance, really.
is it?
It's really low maintenance.
No way, I didn't
I
know
don't have
that.
to comb my hair, no gel.
Mhm.
Every once in a while I have to work the ends, but
But I mean, how long have you had dreads for? I mean, how long does it take? Because my hair grows fast, but that would take years for me.
this on my head is the result of 14 and a half years of growth. Altogether maybe 16 because I had long hair like down to here before I took dreads. But the dreads are almost 15 years now.
Damn.
Yeah.
Those dreads are older than a lot of our viewers. No, that's not even true. However, I mean, that's one aspect that I think society is still really stale on. You know, this idea
Yeah.
that people portray themselves through their clothing. I believe that people are allowed to express themselves, but I don't believe that people should be categorized due to their appearance, even their beliefs. Because
Yeah.
some people are like, oh yeah, you're a leftist, you're super polarized just
Yeah.
because you have an opinion that agrees with leftists. And that to me is absolutely wrong, because putting people in a box dictates that they belong to that box,
Yeah.
which is really stupid.
It's
I never understood
it's
it.
a binary way of thinking. It's thinking in zeros and ones. Like it's either this
Yeah.
way or that way.
It's a black or white
And
issue.
not
There's no
considering-
gray in between.
Yeah, no shades of gray. And I think the gradient type of thinking is more interesting and closer to reality.
That's true. But
Because-
I mean, the Netherlands is a notoriously open-minded country where people tend to, be liberal towards different opinions. That, I mean, you do the same things in other countries, you might get beheaded,
Yeah.
So I am saying that I feel very privileged to be in a country where we're so free. Yet, I believe you've definitely had experiences where people treated you differently due to your dreads, for example.
Oh yeah, sure.
I mean, do you have an example in mind, or is it just like a common thing that people just, like, they look at you and they're like, oh,
Yeah, it happens all the time. Back when I first got my dreads, when I was 20 years old, and I used to get a lot of negative reactions. Most of them were negative. Some of them were like, "Hey, Bob Marley," that's fun.
yeah, that's
but-
cool. I mean,
But many people would think you're a bum, or you must be a dealer or a thug. They have this somehow this negative connotation to dreads. But I do notice that lately I get more positive replies.
oh, so it's getting better.
The view is changing.
I mean,
Right.
I think with social media, everyone is getting a little bit back on their feet in the sense that it's like, okay, people are allowed to do whatever they want. It's like
Yeah.
on media you're allowed to show.
You know what I
whatever.
get a lot is when I go eating somewhere, people assume I'm vegan.
Really?
Yeah, that
I wouldn't have made that
vegan,
connection.
People assume I'm vegan because of the dreads.
Wow.
That's
is that a common
connection
fact?
that's stuck
I
in
didn't
people's
know.
head. But no, I'm not vegan, so
Oh, well, I mean, are you vegetarian?
not even.
So, you see,
People think that because
it's
of the dreads.
predispositions. I believe
Yeah.
people have these assumptions, and they are supported by traditional media. TV has always supported this idea of
Yeah.
the stupid portrayal of reality. Oh, this guy wears full black, so he's probably stealing.
Yeah.
It's so wrong, but somehow to some people it makes sense. And that's what that's what we're trying to put an end to, is this idea that people can just classify you and just be like, yeah, you are this.
I think people are too lazy to perceive reality in all its complexity, and instead they make a very simplified image of reality.
It's easy. You're right.
It's easier to perceive like a cartoon of reality, a very simplified version, than to actually perceive the real thing, which is very complicated.
It's way too complicated.
Yeah.
That's the harsh reality, and people think it's a simple topic to talk about, especially with integration, for example, as we saw with what's his name, Wilders.
Yeah.
He has this opinion that I'm not attacking the people, I'm attacking the religion.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of just separating the two.
Yeah.
And because of this binary thinking, right? It's like black or no, black or white, yes or no.
Yeah.
People are actually like, oh yeah, but that sounds right.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, okay, but it doesn't. It's these issues, you're right. The way that people think dictates the setting, the people around them. And I don't know, it is what it is. At this point, we don't really want to be political, but it is a situation that we're going to see the outcome of. We're literally living through it. I
Yeah.
think this is obscene. But at the same time, look at how I'm talking to you. I'm fenced off.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I'm going to talk to you without this mask on. Because of how are we going to do it? People are going to look at us, and this was obscene a year ago.
Yeah.
So I think things can change. Things can definitely change.
Yeah,
What did you
they
call
can.
these, by the way? What was your nickname for face mask?
Yeah, face diapers. But
Face
I just
diapers.
picked that up on social media. I was like, yeah, that's what they are.
Face diapers.
Yeah.
Well, I mean...
I'm not a
you know.
fan, as you may be able to tell.
Well, I mean, I believe everyone... With this, I believe we need more facts. We need more evidence to support a real opinion. But do you feel like you have ever been singled out in society?
Yeah.
In the Dutch society?
Yeah. On account of not being a 9-to-5 person, being a chronic insomniac. So I'm not really, especially in the winter, in summertime, I can follow a day-night rhythm that's
Mhm.
somewhat like the rest of the people around me. But as soon as autumn starts, from basically the dark and cold months in this country, which is about 8 months a
Yeah,
year.
I was about to say
Most
it's
of the year,
majority.
I
unfortunately,
have
so-
no bearing on day or night whatsoever, and I mostly turn nocturnal. And yeah, I feel like this society, for instance, doesn't really make space for people who have insomnia, like sleeping problems, and who cannot run the 9 to 5. It's either run the 9 to 5 or live in poverty, and
It's hard. It is
sit
hard.
on the sidelines of society and just be happy we won't let you starve.
Well, I mean,
That's kind of a bummer.
I feel like
I
I'm a
guess.
bit too ignorant on the insomniac topic. Could you define it a little better? Like, a little more, sorry. So having is it like a seasonal thing? Because I thought
For
it was
me,
just
it's
like
definitely it's permanent, but definitely seasonal in terms of flaring it up. It flares up. It definitely gets much more pronounced and much more disruptive in the dark months of autumn and winter.
well, I mean, it is disorienting.
Yeah.
By the way, like the sun goes down at 5.
Yeah,
That really throws me off. I'm leaving uni and it's dark,
Yeah.
pitch dark, and I'm like, what's going on,
yeah, it messes me up too. And
But
then
yeah, how is it having? Wait, so insomnia? Essentially, having insomnia means that
it's
you
a
have
sleeping disorder.
Yeah, you have an irregular pattern of sleeping.
Yeah.
I mean, do you feel like these medicinals that they always put forward, these like the herbal treatments, and then there's so many methods. I'm not even gonna get into
I've
that.
tried pretty much all of them, because if you can't
do
sleep,
they work?
you'll eat sand if they'll tell you it'll help you sleep. And almost nothing helps me sleep. And there are very, very strong opiates and opioids that do help, but then again, I do not want to become addicted, because these things are very addictive. So on this, in the short term, it's a very effective solution. In the long run, you have not only will they no longer work because of tolerance, you have an extra problem, an addiction.
Exactly.
So I'm trying to find a long-term solution. I have not found it yet.
I mean, that's the thing with sleeping. People underestimate the power of sleep so much. It's
Oh yeah.
like people assume that especially students, we're trained to run on like 4 to 6 hours of sleep.
Yeah.
Like a lot of the people involved in this production, I think, sleep 4 hours
That's
per night.
devastating on the long run.
Yeah, but devastating on the long run. But for students, it's kind of socially expected.
Yeah.
It's like, oh yeah, but you can do it. You're a student. How important do you think sleep is to the average person?
Very, very important. More important than they realize, because people don't understand that their ability to reason, their ability to concentrate, but also their ability to keep their emotions balanced, to be emotionally resilient. All these things depend on having proper sleep, and because they always have proper sleep, they never thought that all these things depend on proper sleep. You only realize that they do once you don't have proper sleep, and then you lose these faculties, and then you realize they were connected.
Yeah, and then you realize, oh
Yeah.
wait, I'm not performing equally well because
Yeah.
I'm lacking sleep.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I have to say, there's an equal amount of ignorance towards the food we consume, because I feel like a lot of people, especially students, like I'm talking about students most of the time, but with students, for example, it's more like a lot of students are going to buy the basic food, the basic that you can get, because we don't have a financial income that is insanely high compared to the average individual.
Yeah.
However, a friend of mine was elaborating on this, and he was saying it's like a car, If you don't bring it to the mechanic every once in a while, it's not going to perform that well. So you gotta go to the doctor every once in a while, or else you're gonna not know.
Yeah.
You better if you put in the wrong fuel in it, definitely gonna break eventually. Something's gonna break.
Yep.
And that's the thing. It's like, I think it's so easy to compare us to a car, but then you realize a human body is so much more elaborate than that. That is like, what do we know?
Yeah.
Everyone eats differently at different times of the day in different scenarios. People don't eat at all, and yet we survive. But should there be some sort of like governmental related book that just has like what you gotta do to live the perfect life?
That can really go two ways, because in an ideal society that would be ideal, because then people don't know what they need. People
need guidance.
Nutrition experts or biologists. But
We are not biologists. We don't know about
the
COVID.
problem with science nowadays is people need science because they're not all scientists. So they need this community of really intelligent people who study and research everything and come with the best knowledge. But then these people are in a very big position of power. About as much, because everyone listens to the scientists. I mean, they studied for 10
must
plus
know.
years. Who else could know?
Who am
but
I
them?
to say they're wrong?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, but then they have actually come into the same position as the clergy of the Vatican has been for forever in the and they have abused that power. And we also see that scientists who are already in this, basically, they are the modern clergy that everyone listens to. They already have shown to abuse their powers terribly. For instance, with the campaign to hide the harmful effect of tobacco. The tobacco industry has bought many scientists to lie for them.
That's true, actually.
So
I heard
we
about
know,
it.
we already know, and the war on drugs. Were also, a lot of scientists were bought to lie about the supposed harmful effects of cannabis,
Yep.
which were not true in hindsight. So we know that scientists can be bought and that they will lie for big money. And that's what's happening now. I do think a book with perfect nutrition and that tells everyone what to do to live the perfect life would be great if we could trust scientists.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we can't.
And we can't trust anyone.
No, because they're in positions of power.
Exactly. I mean, damn.
So it's kind
that's
of
a
paranoid.
sad, yeah, it
but
is a sad way to think about it. But there is this rule, I think, there's this thing that I like to view. It's a friend made a list about rules, and one of them is, I think, Rule 37: don't trust anyone, not even me.
Yeah.
And I think that does it well, because it's like it doesn't matter who is telling you what. You
Yeah.
shouldn't even trust yourself, because your perception of reality is still subjective to you.
I do think you should trust yourself, or at least some part of yourself
Oh,
that
yeah.
knows reality. And I do think we have an inner reality detector. It may sometimes be buried under a lot of doubt or delusions, but we do have like what's called intuition,
Yeah.
like a
Thank
reality
God for that.
detector. So I do think we should trust our intuition and our common sense. And sometimes we cannot determine what's true or who's lying, and then we can stay neutral, but sometimes we can. Like using common sense. So you can trust yourself if you have a good contact with your intuition and you are rational.
Yeah, you gotta be rational.
You are in control of your emotions.
But so, what should an individual do? Should a person rely on what a scientist tells them, or what the general opinion is?
No, you can look at what a scientist says, and then you can look at what 20 other scientists say, and you'll find that many of them contradict each other.
A lot.
And you'll
Yeah.
have to look at lots of different studies about that particular subjects to see what lots of different scientists with lots of different studies have to say about it. And then you may find that there might be a consensus among scientists, but then also you may find that even though there is a consensus, there's still a pretty large group of scientists that disagree, and there are some big businesses that profit from the consensus. So, you always have to take into consideration corruption when reviewing science.
I mean, what you said about the cigarettes is very profound. I mean, Lucky Strike, for example, one of the leading cigarette brands in the U.S. in the, what was it, the 60s or something? I don't. Someone needs to check that one, but there's a collection of the packages and the adverts and all of that, and it's so interesting to watch. It was like 9 out of 10 scientists suggest smoking at least a cigarette a day, and you're
That
like,
was,
what? You say that now, you'll literally be arrested.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
So if we couldn't trust the scientists back then, why can we trust them now?
I think
Exactly.
the reason why we, like, a lot of people will make the argument that the reason why we should trust them now is because they're under scrutiny by media all the time. I mean,
Not really.
I'm just bringing up the arguments, but like, and I somehow understand that, because it's like, okay, the big scientists are always under scrutiny by other scientists, right?
Yeah.
Because they contradict each other, so it's like they will argue with each other. But if it's a statistical, objective truth, how can there be a counter argument? There are just some truths. We have some truths, right? It's like, okay, we don't know what life is. We don't know what it's for. We don't know what the message is. We don't know why we're here. But at least we know, I know how tall I am.
Yeah.
I know
that's
my
a
age.
given.
Those things are not things that are deniable. Those are facts.
There are facts. for
Yeah,
sure.
and that's the thing. And there's this, I don't know why, but on media, it's really easy to confuse facts with theories.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's the problem. You have these bold claims made by big newspapers like, by 2030, 47% of the population will remain from COVID. You're like, what? That's 3.5 billion people
That's
just
not
perishing.
a prediction. That's a threat.
That's yeah.
It's a threat.
It does feel that
It's
way.
not a prediction.
But it's kind of like, and then you're like, oh, but which scientist made it? Ah, nobody. Don't worry about it. Private
Yeah.
scientist who lives in some weird, you
Yeah.
don't even know it exists. This place doesn't exist. We just
Yeah.
made it up for this scientist so that it could
Yeah.
exist.
But they can basically tell you anything, and as long as you don't do any research to either try and reproduce the results or get something else, you'll never know. So it's easy for people to fool you using scientists said this, and this scientific study proved that. Because you can take any subject in science and research disease, mortality rates, take numbers, and then you can just take the various numbers, and if you read the whole table, you see that the numbers paint a certain picture. But if you take only selectively a few numbers from that page and you present them in one sentence, then you can completely change the subject, the context of what you're communicating. So not only the facts themselves, but the way in which the facts are presented determine the perception of the people, the audience who is told the facts.
Exactly, the
Because
facts.
you can play a lot. I mean, manipulators have a lot of room to play with how they're going to word the facts, and then how they're going to influence the perception of the audience. So the facts, they can still go back and say, we only gave you facts, we gave you no lies, but by hustling up and mixing up the facts and putting it in a certain context and leaving out other facts,
Yeah.
they gave you a certain image that's false.
Yeah.
So they got you to believe in a delusion without lying.
And it's
Omitting
like,
truth is...
and it's hard to say whether it's voluntary or not.
Yeah.
Because it's hard to prove that, for example, a newspaper is trying to push forward a specific agenda. Because how do you show intent? It's like, oh,
Yeah.
but they tried to do that. They knew what they were doing and they did it on purpose. So they should be, persecuted for doing that, because you're essentially misinforming a big chunk of people knowingly, right? But it's hard to prove intent. Mm-hmm. And I mean, bringing it back to, for example, the topic of DMT, there are a lot of studies that made a lot of preposterous claims about psychedelic as a whole, and they kind of intoxicated the well. So there's a lot of people, and an overwhelming amount, that if you even say the word psychedelic, they immediately think of like the devil, like stuff that is like obscene, like murder. Things they put psychedelics, exactly, they put psychedelics, they hold them to such a high extent that it's like, yes, they are equally bad as like world famine.
Because they've only ever been talked about, psychedelics. They've only ever been introduced to psychedelics through media that has always associated them to murder, to crime.
Bad things, to really bad things.
And it's like Bill Hicks said. There's this one Bill Hicks show that says, where he says something like, people always think of the worst things when they hear about LSD. They'll never hear he's talking about this news report. Young man takes LSD, sees everything.
Pink elephant or something.
This is actually the most common experience on LSD. This one freak accident where this guy jumps out of a building because he thinks he can fly. That's actually one in a million. Whereas most LSD trips are actually more like Bill Hicks, like you're staring at the sky and just appreciating how unspeakably beautiful and precious life is. And this is most LSD trips, but you'll never hear about it in the media. So most people won't make that association.
I mean, there are now more and more accounts like psychedelic substance. That's the name of the Instagram, but there are a lot of accounts that are now sharing their experiences, their psychedelic experiences with the world, to give people the truth, because you can see them whilst they're undergoing the trip. They show you what it is, it's just them, either someone doing DMT and it's just them doing it, and you're like, oh, that, I thought it would be completely crazier, but it's just a dude in a room doing his thing and finding himself, and at the end he tells you this whole story. It's crazy. It's normal people. I know.
They have this image that they must be weird hippies or have some extreme hobbies or have no kind of normalcy to their life, but no, they're average people. It's the same with the image that many people who don't smoke cannabis have about the people who smoke cannabis. They think they're all. I mean, I do look the part. I'll admit that. So in that sense, some stereotypes might be true, coincidentally, but there's a lot of people in the coffee shop that I see that I mean, the person who has the stereotypical hippie stoner image in his head would be very surprised to see these people walk in and out of coffee shops, like people in suits and ties,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
people who have jobs and homes and have a mortgage and a wife and kids. You know, people who are not at all anything like the stereotype. So yeah, I know that.
I mean, it is quite funny. I will say, like, what you just mentioned is true. I mean, I saw it with my own eyes a couple of times. You'd have, in the city center of The Hague, you just have, like, embassies and important, you know, like, multinational companies just chilling there. And then you have these men just coming in suits, getting their burrito or something from a fast Mexican restaurant, grab the burrito, go pick up some weed, grab the weed, go
sure.
home, and they live on. And you're like, wait, I thought you were a business
Actually,
guy.
these people who seem the most serious and together actually are behind the scenes the wildest and most unhinged, because they have to step in line and they have to follow, or they basically have to jump through hoops and obey all day. And then when they do good, they get a good pay, but they basically they have no freedom, and they have a lot of creativity and spontaneity and playfulness in them. Really, even though they look so serious on the outside, they have desires to be playful and to joyful and to be hedonistic, just like any of us. But they have to keep it down because they have to be professional all the time. So when they do unload, they like unload big time. So that's usually like these are the most unhinged people on the dance floor.
But do you think, on the dance floor, that's for sure. I want to see. I want to see.
Privately at their homes, probably.
Yeah. But I mean, it is quite a funny thing to see. It's like how people have to portray themselves in this professional manner when they have a important job, or what they consider to be an important job. But here in the Netherlands, I feel like everyone can make a case for having an important job. Like, I mean, I saw a lot of artists, for example, in The Hague, who are genuinely, that's what they do. They just do art, you know? They have a really nice house. Their art pieces are not like Van Gogh, you know, is like best piece in the world. They make art. They're happy. There's no discrimination. You know, it's like you're just talking to someone. It's like, oh, what do you do? I'm an artist. Nice. What are you? An engineer.
Yeah.
That's something that in a lot of countries I don't see a lot of.
But that's maybe because you have interaction mostly with other students.
Could also be true.
They're more open-minded, but most people, like Dutch people here, who are born and raised here, a lot of them have this very rigid mindset, like, oh, go get a real job. And then they're skeptical. But then again, it is still quite difficult to actually make a living as an artist. And there are commercial ways of going about it, like becoming an animator or doing logos.
Doing adverts.
Yeah,
advertisements.
But yeah, it's quite difficult. So my brother-in-law is actually an artist who paints, and he studied and he does paint, and he can sell his paintings for quite a lot of money. But then still, he's not like doing that all the time, because even though at some points he may earn very well by just selling 3 paintings, and he can last 5 years and not do a damn thing just to be just to live. True. Then maybe the next 3 years he won't get any customers, so it's not a stable income.
Yeah, that's true as well. But
unless you're doing it really commercially,
exactly,
that's true. That's give you a stable
There's
income.
a saying in, like, I mean, a lot of Roman rap, like Italian rap, you would find that a lot of people are like, yeah, you can create the same song for a publicity stunt, right? You can copy my song, but it's never gonna be as good, you know. And that's the claim that they always make, and it's like, I get it, you know. People work on their art for years. Some people just have a stroke of luck, you know, and they just find their piece. But there is also this discriminatory assumption to artists that, oh, you're an artist in the Netherlands, you must do drugs.
Yeah.
You must be tripping all the time. There's not a moment in your life that you are sober. And that assumption to me really does feel kind of stupid, because as you said, we can't make an assumption about a businessman, you know, being in suit and everything on a Sunday night, you know?
Yeah.
But we can make an assumption about an artist because his income is not as stable.
Yeah, basically.
Isn't that, that's...
People here are still very much stuck in the mindset where trying to determine their self-worth or other people's worth, they look at the
their
job.
income.
And it's petty.
It is petty.
Still very much.
But I will say the Dutch society is one that is very prolific for its people. Like, I mean, people here are generally wealthy. They don't really have many problems in regards to, like, for example, is like social uprisings that are in comparison to other countries that have it a lot worse. The Netherlands is a very privileged country where freedom of expression is, pushed forward, and there's a lot of movements. One movement that I wanted to bring to you is, for example, what I saw. It was quite in The Hague, that there was just a mountain of roses. At Central, there was just a mountain of roses, and on each rose there was this note that said, "Rest in peace, democracy."
Yeah.
And me being external to the whole situation, I just came and I saw that, and I was like, oh, I thought the worst. I thought, okay, democracy's gone, I'm out. I'm gonna be kicked out soon. Whatever, maybe authoritarian regime gets on and we're all doomed.
Yeah.
That's what I thought. But it was in regards to the mask topic and how that essentially takes away the freedom. And I in my time here, across like a decade of living here, I found that Dutch people look up to their freedom more than anything else. To them, that's the reason why you might want to be here. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong.
To me, it is. I'm not sure about the rest of this country, but
You could tell me your opinion.
It is for sure, because lots of people are very compliant with the rules and also think, this will all be over soon. And
how do we
I
know?
think they're very naive, because the government and the World Health Organization, world governments all over the world.
No, joking.
The WHO, who? These guys. These guys that think I guess I call them the World Hegemony Organization.
Oh, nice.
Because they're really lording over the whole world. They're essentially now overriding the governing rights of governments all over the world. So, they're, as far as I can tell, they're the world government, at least the organization that gives orders on behalf of the world government. And I think that
I think people should always
quite clearly an Orwellian development, and I don't think people should be so naive to think that this is all gonna blow over soon and then we're gonna get everything back. I think that there's always been a push for totalitarianism, but then they realize that they cannot do it too quickly or they'll run into too much resistance. So they do it slowly. So people get used to gradually losing one freedom at a time.
To be honest, the amount of conspiracy theories I've heard about COVID, like anything is possible at this point. Like I've heard so many theories that initially you're like, oh, this makes no sense. Then they explain it to you and you're like, oh, actually this makes more sense than anything I knew before. But not to say that any of them are true, right? Because at the end of the day, as we already discussed, we're not scientists. I mean, they could literally come tomorrow and be like, oh, by the way, it was all fake, mass hysteria, and we literally were wearing masks until that point because we don't know better.
It's proven that these particular masks don't help at all.
Yeah, there is proof that like a lot of masks
Not even
suck.
a little bit.
Like you need the T53, I think. The T53
The
is like
medical
the
ones.
the N95 and the there's
no T-53.
Is that not a Russian tank or something?
Nah,
That
I
sounds
don't
like
know, to be
a
honest.
Soviet tank.
I'm not a commie, I wouldn't know. No, I'm joking. No, but I mean,
Fact check him, Hassan.
yeah, fact check me, please. But the T53 is a tank.
N95 is the right mask. Say it.
Hey, the N95 is the correct mask you should look for when choosing a mask that you will wear. But I will say, choose wisely because there's a lot of masks that apparently don't do anything. As you just said, you're right. There's a lot of masks that genuinely is putting underwear in your face. No joke. No joke. You can literally check it. A lot of these masks are made from underwear and tissues that have been used.
Cotton.
So at the end of the day, you're not incorrect by saying they are face underwear essentially.
Yeah.
It is ironic, but it's so funny to me. But it is what can we do? What do you think we can do as people?
We can massively disobey to show them that we're not impressed with their orders or their threats, and that they better give up this push for totalitarianism now.
That's a very radical opinion, but everything's
I think
welcome,
it's fair.
man. Everything's that's the thing. Everything
that
is
was me
fair in
being
the game.
patient. I have a very different idea of being radical.
No,
I
that's
think
true.
that
But
taking away people's freedoms, like liberties, like they did, and dehumanizing people and making contact and gatherings impossible or at least very difficult, that's a capital crime. That's an attack on humanity itself.
freedom as a whole,
and it is one of the highest crimes. And I don't think a government should ever be trusted again. The mere fact that they exist, that they live, and they're free to do as they please, is a threat to everyone. And that's, I think, what they did. And they could actually get away with this if they just said, okay, have your life back. They could get away with this, but I think they're going to try and push this because they're drunk on power.
Yeah, they're drawing a lot
drunk on the idea of getting even more power. And they don't see things for what they are. Yeah. They don't see the risks of what they're doing.
It is a dangerous game because, I mean, I would always support the idea that people should continuously question what they know as facts, right?
Yeah.
So they should always question the reality they're in no matter what. And your approach, as you said, there are different definitions to radicals, and that is correct. Mm-hmm. Because to one person, your opinion is radical. To a lot of other people, they're like, yeah, but what tells you that's not the case?
Yeah, what I think is radical is when politicians in Europe are now speaking and advocating for forced vaccinations. That's radical. Because that's that's considering whether or not we should violate, if not just erase, the right to self-determination. And that's one of the most sacred rights of a civilized, liberal, free society. If you're going to attack that, there's literally nothing. You know, there's literally no reason for people to not pick up guns and start to physically fight to defend their right to self-determination.
I mean, it has happened
because
before.
If you're this warped in your view of reality that you think you have the right to violate other people's right to self-determination, I mean, you might as well rape them. Because essentially, if you think you have the right to put needles and fluids in their bodies, maybe you might want to put other things and other fluids in their bodies. I mean, clearly that's the mindset of a rapist. And if you think that that's somehow justified, I mean, expect heavy resistance.
The injecting part got me, man.
And I'm going to leave it at that because, you know.
The injecting part got me.
That's the real, with the police.
Yeah. No, yeah, you're not even wrong. That's
but,
correct.
You know, it's common sense. Just don't threaten to violate people's right to self-determination because crazy things will happen when you do. Crazy.
It's true. People will be limited to their own. I mean, look. I will give it this. Before I did a lot of research recently on a topic that I thought was very interesting. It was brought up by a lot of radicals. These are actually considered radical political figures or people with political ideologies that are very certain. And for example, they debate in the US about freedom and freedom of expression, right?
Yeah.
And it's like there's this new, even in Canada, there's this new law that essentially dictates that if you misgender someone, you're breaking the law. Right?
Yeah.
But look, I am completely pro any of that. It's like, look, if you could come in, be like, don't mention anything, don't mention my name, call me whatever, you know, cola or something. And I'll be like, okay, I'll call you that out of respect, right?
Yeah.
But when the government comes to me and they're like, you have to do it or I'll handcuff you, then I'm like, wait, but I studied gender pronouns my entire life. I learned English. The first thing that I got to know was he, she, it, and all that.
Yeah.
So am I wrong for doing something that is linguistically correct?
That is tyranny.
And that's the thing. This ties really well with your topic because at the end of the day, it's like, okay, but why am I not entitled to having my own freedom of speech?
You are.
And then that's the thing. You are, but then, but you're doing this against them. And you're like, no, but I'm trying my best. You know, I'm trying my best to be inclusive of everyone. Yeah. But I can't lose all of what I have to give to everyone else.
It's the compulsion. That's wrong. It's like, I'm sure you know Jordan B. Peterson.
Yeah, Jordan Peterson
exactly
is
where
one of those
went
people.
where like he protested, and that actually became the kickstart for his rise to fame. He refused to obey a Canadian law that was just passed that.
Well, he actually didn't
makes
refuse.
It mandatory.
He said he would help out,
on a personal basis.
But to him, it wasn't right.
But for me, that's the same. I know transgender people, and out of respect, and because I don't want to hurt their feelings, I personally believe they live in a delusion. It's a silly one too. But I love them and I don't want them to be hurt. And I understand that this delusion is the only thing that stands between them and their whole image of self collapsing. So I'm just going to be careful. I'm just going to say,
of course,
bro,
this is a very
I know you're not my
topic.
bro. You know, I know you're actually a woman. Very hard trying to be a man. I know you're not a man, but you know what? I'm going to call you bro because I don't want to hurt your feelings. That's a personal decision. But when it's compulsive, when it's under threat of punishment, that's where I protest.
Yeah.
Because language should be free, and if it's not, then what is free?
Especially when you're teaching it in schools to this very moment.
Yeah.
Like there's kids in elementary school right now learning he, she, it. And what? You're teaching them something that is politically incorrect?
Yeah.
But then again, biology.
Leave kids alone.
Like 400 years ago, the debate was settled by what is it called? Chromosomic biology, which is the
Yeah.
study of chromosomes. And they made it clear there's only 2 biological genders
Yeah.
that are biologically achievable, right?
Mhm.
That's a fact. But then
Yeah.
you take that apart and you're like, oh, but you're denying the sexuality of these people. And you're like, but I never mentioned
No.
sexuality. You see, and that's the
Yeah.
same thing.
Biology
it's like here, it's
and
like
sexuality.
you're being
Sexuality is
forced.
like a psychological an experience.
Yeah.
You know, and biology is just a bunch of facts.
Biology is a science. I
Yeah,
don't know why
science-
people
it's not
joke
fe-
about
it's not
science
about
all the time.
Science and facts don't care about your feelings.
Yeah,
you know?
that
So
is-
it's just like
that
it is
is
what
true,
it is.
but-
You feel about it the way you feel about it, but you know,
I think Ben Shapiro said that a couple of times.
yeah,
But like at the end of the day, like that's the problem. Is you see, it's like it's a constant warfare. But as an individual, as a part of the audience, you must always refrain from being polarized. Because the moment you go from one side, from an extreme to the other, or
Yeah.
just stay in an extreme, I believe you're wrong. Because you have to acknowledge everything.
Yeah.
And once you acknowledge everything, you're like, okay, I know this, I know that. Now I can compare them and be like, okay, I'm here.
yeah.
You can be polarized, but as long as you understand.
And you can also, that's what I would like to see in people, and I don't see it. People have very much pride, and it would be nice to see if people just admit it more often that they have not enough knowledge or insight into a topic to have a valid opinion. Because lots of the time it's just people's egos that says, "Oh, I want to have an opinion about this too," when really they have not enough background information or knowledge.
That's true.
So yeah, that would solve a lot of problems.
I mean, this is a hot take. I just want to ask for the sake of asking, but do you think 18-year-olds should be allowed to vote?
Difficult.
It is a difficult question, but
yes,
it's really up
yes,
to.
But yes,
Yeah,
yeah.
because I heard this argumentation recently. I'm just going to tell you because I thought it was really interesting. He made this argumentation that was like, people need to have knowledge on the entirety of what society is before
Yeah.
they can speak for society. And I thought that was really interesting. But then I thought, okay, but then what's the age that you should vote at? And if you can vote
Is
only
it
at like
age
what 30,
discrimination?
then
Yeah.
you're giving power to the older
Yeah.
generations rather than the younger ones.
It's easy to point at old people and say, well, look, this is their power. They've been alive longer,
It's true,
so
it's
they've
easy.
seen more of this nonsense called life, so they know more about it. That's not necessarily true.
It's always
Because
oppressor and oppressed.
Whether you are wiser as you get old, whether you actually grow wiser as you grow older, depends on your willingness to learn and how big your pride is. The bigger your pride is, the more difficult you're going to the more difficulty you're going to have to admit your mistakes and to better yourself.
Yeah.
So people with a humongous pride, and there's lots of those,
A lot of them, more than you
learn
know.
slow or not at all, because they don't even get to the point where they admit their mistakes,
And
so
that
they
is the
can't
biggest
outgrow them.
fault. I mean, I'll give
So
you
being
that.
older does not necessarily mean you're wiser, and that's where also I think many people, not only when they grow older, they don't wisen up because they're too stubborn to learn,
Yeah, fair
but
enough.
also they lose zeal, they lose fighting spirit, they
Ah.
lose happiness and joy, and this is something that young people still have, and that's why I think their vote and their input in what this country is going to be,
Yeah.
or in any country, is very important, because they still have sight on things that are important that many old people have lost.
Yeah, they don't care about anymore.
No?
They just don't
They
care.
just gave up the
Yeah,
fight.
they don't care. I mean, that is fair.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it's like, I think your argument is fair that people, like, I mean, if we represent all the age groups, it's going to balance out eventually.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is the principle of democracy and everything that it stands for, is
Yeah.
this idea that everybody should have a say and that the ultimate truth will come out if everyone speaks their mind. And so far, it has worked.
Mhm.
So far, it has worked.
We
and
haven't imploded.
yeah, it hasn't
haven't
imploded yet.
exterminated
Democracy
ourselves
and
yet.
capitalism are
So, yeah.
still, I guess, the only, if I'm not mistaken, the only functioning.
Poorly functioning,
Poorly,
but
but
at least
functioning,
at least
you know?
not imploding on itself.
Yeah, and it didn't cause millions and millions of deaths yet. Probably has actually. I'm just too
Here and
ignorant.
there.
Yeah, here and there for
Pinochet,
sure. I'm not looking at the
Videla,
U.S. right now. I'm
things
just letting
happen.
it. Yeah, I'm just letting it
But
sit
it
out
could
of my
be a
mind.
lot worse.
We
Yeah.
have done a lot worse. That's true. But hey, whatever. I didn't mean to end on a depressing note.
No.
But this is the world we
Yeah,
live in, and
it is.
it was a really interesting conversation I had.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining the podcast.
Thank you for
I would
having
love for you to come back. Do you want to say anything to the people before you leave? Any piece
Yeah.
of wisdom?
Yeah, well, for now.
Oh yeah, that's your camera. If you.
Oh yeah. For now, I would like to say that I would have loved to talk much more about my psychedelic experiences, but they're so abstract and so complex. I have to talk for 6 hours. So
Yeah.
and
If you
I
guys
think-
want to see that, I'm down.
yeah, if you want to have me next time, I bring my black book in which I have a lot of drawings,
Oh.
because my drawings are a much better expression of my psychedelic experience than words.
That's amazing. That is a cliffhanger.
bring
I
that.
want to leave that on that.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having
I can't
me.
even shake your hand, but
Yeah.
I appreciate you. And until next time, everybody, thank you.
So long.